In some studies of hunter-gatherer groups, the common average lifespan of adults was not 30, not 40, but could be around 65 to 75 years old. So why do millions of people still believe that ancient humans usually died before the age of 30? And if ancient people really died young, why do we find in Dmanisi an individual who had lost almost all their teeth but still lived for many more years? Or in Shanidar, a wounded Neanderthal with healed injuries who lived long enough for the body to repair the bones? The answer does not lie in ancient people becoming old as soon as they grew up. It lies in a very cold statistical trap. Life expectancy at birth is not the age at which adults usually died. It sounds technical, but in fact, it is one of the saddest misunderstandings about the history of humankind, because the number 30 does not mean everyone collapsed at the age of 30. It means that too many children never had the chance to grow up. Before going further, let us be fair to that number. Ancient life really was dangerous. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no safe surgery. A cut could become infected. A difficult birth could kill both mother and child. A hungry season could leave the whole camp silent around the fire. One night wandering too far from the circle of light could be the final mistake. But those things only prove that death was closer. They do not prove that the human body in the past expired at the age of 30. To see the trap, imagine it. 10 children born in an ancient community. 5 die very early, before they can even remember their parents' faces. The remaining 5 live to the age of 60. The average lifespan is about 30. But no one actually died at the age of 30. Half died when they were far too young. Half became old people. The average number is mathematically correct, but it tells the wrong story in your mind. That is why the phrase "ancient people died before 30" is very dangerous. It makes us imagine the past as full of very young adults, living fast and growing old early, disappearing before they had long memories. While the truth is much more painful, the thing that dragged average life expectancy down was not age 30. It was childhood. For most of history, children were where death gathered most cruelly. One bout of diarrhea could be enough. One unexplained fever could be enough. Lack of milk, dirty water, infection, premature birth, losing the mother during childbirth, all of these could turn the first years of life into the hardest gate. Today, when a child has a fever, we think of medicine, doctors, hospitals, tests. For most of history, a community could only do simpler things: keep the child warm, give water, and hope the body would survive. Our World in Data once summarized a chilling reality. In many societies of the past, almost 1 out of every 2 children did not live to adulthood. Imagine a group of 30 children sitting around the fire, then erase 15 of them, not because they went somewhere else, not because they grew up and ran away, but because they never reached the age to become adults. That is the real tragedy behind the number 30. If you want to understand ancient lifespan, do not look at a 30-year-old person. Look at the cradles that never grew up. But if a person survived childhood, the story changed. They had passed through the most dangerous stretch. The body had learned many diseases. The eyes had learned how to read tracks. The hands knew which tools could easily cut the skin. They knew which water was drinkable, which fruits were poisonous, which season not to cross the valley. A 20-year-old in that world was not only lucky to be alive, they were someone who had accumulated thousands of small lessons, many of them paid for by the deaths of others. Anthropological data shows this very clearly. Gurven and Kaplan, when comparing many hunter-gatherer groups, recorded life expectancy at birth ranging from about 21 to 37 years. That sounds very low, but the survival rate to age 45 was still about 26 to 43%. And if a person had reached the age of 45, they could still live on average about 14 to 24 more years. In other words, the number 30 is not a statue. It is a layer of fog. Behind it, there were still people in their 50s. Threats, even older, Führer, was not as common as in modern society, but common enough to break the image that ancient people almost had no old age. Some overviews of hunter-gatherer communities and traditional subsistence groups also show that the common age at death for adults could be around 65 to 75 years old. This may sound contradictory to an average lifespan of 30, but in fact, it is not contradictory at all. One number is calculated from birth. The other number looks at those who survived the cruelest early stage, and when you understand this, the past suddenly changes shape. An ancient camp could still be very young. Many children, teenagers, and young parents. But if you stayed long enough, you would see other faces. People who walked more slowly, people with more worn teeth, people who no longer hunted quickly, but were still listened to when the whole group was uncertain. Before writing existed, people like that were the place where knowledge was stored, things that could not be found in books. Because books did not yet exist, they remembered where water ran dry first during the last drought. They remembered which streams still held moisture beneath the stones. They remembered which roots were edible when the leaves dried, and which looked like food but could kill children. They remembered how a difficult birth had been survived, how a wound had once healed over, how a herd of animals had changed its route because winter came early. But so this is not just a beautiful inference. Look at the bones. At Dmanisi in Georgia, archaeologists today found an individual, an ancient Homo from about 1.77 million years ago. Famous because he had been nearly toothless for many years before death. Most teeth had fallen out long before, and the jawbone had resorbed. For someone who could no longer chew hard food, surviving for many more years was not easy. It proves one thing. Very early in human history, a weak and old individual who could no longer eat like an ordinary person could still live long enough for that trace to be etched into bone, meaning the community was not made only of young, strong people who cared only for themselves. There was already room for dependence. There was already room for continuing to live, even when the body was no longer perfect. Another example comes from Shanidar I, a Neanderthal man in Shanidar Cave, Iraq. He lived to about 35 to 45 years old, an age already considered old for a Neanderthal. His body carried many traces of healed trauma, injury to the face, one weak, withered arm, vision and hearing may have been affected, walking may have been very difficult. Shanidar I is often mentioned as evidence of care in Neanderthal society. But this must be said carefully. Exactly what level of care existed is still debated. A skeleton cannot tell us who brought food, who helped him stand, or how much he managed on his own. What the bones can say is this: those injuries had healed. He did not die immediately after them. He lived long enough for his body to repair the bones, long enough for those limitations to become part of his life. Perhaps he received direct help. Perhaps he adapted to another role in the group. Perhaps both. But whichever explanation is correct, Shanidar I still breaks the simple image that the past belonged only to young, fast, perfect bodies. An old person does not need to run as fast as the young to have value. They may know things the young have never faced. When drought comes for the first time for the young, it is already the third time in the memory of the old. When a child eats an unfamiliar fruit by mistake, an elder may remember the story of another child who died from that fruit. When the whole group wants to follow a herd, an elder may remember that the path once led to a waterless place. That is something that does not fossilize easily. Bones can preserve fractures, but they cannot preserve the story that saved a group from choosing the wrong path. In 2004, Caspari and Lee published a study in PNAS, arguing that the number of adults old enough to become grandparents increased sharply among modern humans in the late Paleolithic. They suggested that the rise in older adults may have contributed to population expansion and cultural innovation. Put more simply, when more people live long enough to remember, to teach, watch children, and retell what happened, the whole group learns faster than one lifetime. And if you think everything ends here, not yet. Civilization did not invent old age. Old age had always been possible. What civilization did, increasingly powerfully, over thousands of years, was keep children alive long enough to have the chance to become old. Clean water, sanitation systems, vaccines, antibiotics, safe childbirth care, better nutrition, hospitals. But those things did not turn humans into a new species. They reduced the number of babies dying before they could grow up, reduced the number of mothers dying in childbirth, reduced the number of small wounds turning into death. When children stopped disappearing as often as before, average life expectancy rose, not because humans were suddenly allowed to grow old, but because more people were allowed to live long enough to grow old. Now let us return to the original statement. Ancient people usually died before the age of 30. If you understand it as life expectancy at birth, In many ancient contexts, it may be roughly correct, but if you understand it to mean that ancient adults usually collapsed at the age of 30, then it is wrong in a way that distorts how we see the past. It makes us imagine ancient people as short-lived beings, while in fact, among those young camps, there were still old faces, people who remembered harsh winters, people who knew where water could be found, people who carried knowledge in their minds that was not carved into stone, but helped the whole group survive one more season. The real story is not that ancient humans expired at the age of 30. The real story is more painful. Many people never reached that age, and every old person who appeared in that world was silent evidence that someone had survived disease, hunger, thirst, childbirth, accidents, wild animals, infection, the cruelest first years of life for most of human history. The greatest challenge was not living to 80. The greatest challenge was living long enough to earn the right to grow old.